to the public and to the news media yet. Among the 210 passengers on the plane last night was ABC Sports executive producer Jack O'Hara, his wife, and their 13-year-old daughter. Jack was on his last assignment for ABC Sports, and Eddie Aruza now is live on the west side of Manhattan. Eddie?
Bill, the first names that TWA officials released today of those on Flight 800 were those of the cockpit crew. And it turns out that one of the pilots and the flight engineer were from our area, residents of Connecticut. But before those names were released, we at Eyewitness News got word that one of our colleagues at ABC Sports was on the flight, a young man who had a rewarding and rewarded career and who was seemingly on the way to be going on to bigger and better things. It was hard for any work to get done today at the offices of ABC Sports. Instead, there were hushed conversations, tears, and comforting hugs. The reason for it all was ABC Sports executive producer Jack O'Hara. Along with his wife and 13-year-old daughter, the 39-year-old O'Hara was among those on Flight 800 last night.
Jack was leaving ABC Sports, and we're doing the Tour de France this weekend. This was actually Jack's last show with ABC Sports.
After a 14-year award-winning career with ABC, O'Hara was going to pursue other interests, but he'd also distinguished himself away from his profession. Just last month, O'Hara and his wife Janet were featured on an Eyewitness News story for being mentors. Into their home, they had welcomed a disadvantaged youngster.
I think that his experience, hopefully with us and our family, has really provided him with the kind of self-confidence that he's going to need to go out and survive.
The O'Haras had 3 kids of their own. But aside from being on the verge of a new career path, there was another ironic twist to O'Hara being on the doomed flight. He hated to fly.
He clearly had a fear, of flying, and, drove and took trains.
But one of last night's victims loved to fly, the 63-year-old flight engineer Richard Campbell. His Ridgewood, Connecticut home was cordoned off today as his widow, teenage sons, and friends grieved. The family priest spoke on their behalf.
They're very proud of his service to TWA. He just received his 30-year pin for service. Richard was a devoted husband, proud father, and a fine friend.
The other crew member from our area was Captain Steve Snyder of Stratford, Connecticut. Now, we mentioned in the story that the O'Haras had 3 kids. They had twin 12-year-old sons. They were not on the flight. They were left behind with their grandparents to go to summer camp. We're live on the Upper West Side. Eddie Aruza, Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
Thank you, Eddie, very much. Other families in our area are mourning loved ones as well. The scene was much the same in Montoursville, Pennsylvania. 16 students from the local high school were killed in the crash. The community had held fundraisers to pay for the children's trip to Paris. And now let's go back to Sarah Wallace live in East Moriches on Long Island. Sarah?
Well, Bill, I think it's significant that the governor is saying tonight that there is every reason to possibly characterize this as a criminal investigation. He's still couching it, but it seems to indicate where he at least stands on this issue. So far, more than 100 bodies have now been pulled out of the waters, and it now appears increasingly likely that this is a recovery effort rather than a rescue effort.
Charred, scarred, fragments, pieces of the plane, pieces of lives lost in a flicker of flame that erupted in the night sky. A Coast Guard cutter watched from below.
They saw a fireball fall into the water about 10 or 15 miles from their position.
Flight 800, which originated in Athens, landed at JFK yesterday afternoon and spent 3 hours on the ground before an 8 p.m. departure for Paris. By 8:45, it had disappeared from the radar screen without so much as a distress signal. Then the fireball that plunged into the ocean 10 miles south of Moriches Inlet on the south shore of Long Island.
There were approximately 5 explosions that were very quick. Boom, 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 boom. And then I looked back up at the sweep of where the fire once was, and now there was thick black smoke with a white cloud on top of it. And I knew that if this was a plane or whatever it was, nothing could have survived the first explosion.
And there would be no survivors in the hours to follow, in spite of a massive rescue effort. It continued into this afternoon. The entire area designated a crime scene to secure any possible evidence.
What we're doing is searching boxes. Altogether, it comes out to 240 square miles. There's a helicopter in the central boxes. So we have a central data point, where we got the initial crash report, and we are searching 240 square miles from that position.
Governor Pataki told me he was clearly moved after speaking to the families.
One of the fathers said that he put his 11-year-old daughter on the plane to go study French. My 11-year-old daughter just came back from studying French. She went to Canada, and I remember her exuberance and excitement about going and what she learned, and it's just a tremendous tragedy for the families. It's a tragedy for all of us, but we've got to pull together, have our prayers and support with the families, and do everything we can to answer whatever questions they have.
And hopefully some of those answers perhaps could come as early as tomorrow. Scuba teams will dive into the waters to hopefully retrieve the 2 black boxes. Live from Long Island, Sarah Wallace, Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
Thanks again, Sarah. Now recapping major developments in the crash of TWA Flight 800. All 228 people aboard the Boeing 747 were killed last night when the plane exploded in a fireball over the skies of Long Island. More than 100 bodies have been recovered, many of them badly charred, and the possibility that an act of terrorism caused the crash is now being investigated. When we come back in just a moment, President Clinton reacts to the plane crash, advises caution in the nation's judgment, and the latest on the investigation and the theory that Middle Eastern terrorists may be behind the downing of the plane, as our coverage of the crash of TWA Flight 800 continues. A branch of the federal government is on the scene of the crash of Flight 800. President Clinton says it's too soon to say whether this was an act of terrorism.
We will determine what happened. But for now, I want to caution again the American people against jumping to any conclusions, and ask that today, overwhelmingly, our people remember the families of the people who were on that flight in their prayers.
Addressing a group of teenagers later in the day, Mr. Clinton said the tragedy is made even worse because so many young lives were lost. With every hour, the investigation and the mystery deepen. International terrorism here on our shores is considered to be a possible cause of the tragedy of TWA's Flight 800. Diana Williams is in our newsroom with the full story on this. Diana?
Well, thank you, Bill. More and more terrorist experts are coming to the conclusion that the explosion and crash of TWA Flight 800 was no accident. There are 2 theories at this hour. One focuses on the possibility of a bomb that was placed on board the jet. The other scenario, though, focuses on a surface-to-air missile possibly fired by a Mideast terrorist group. The Mideast group, now under close scrutiny, calls itself the Movement for Islamic Change. Last November, it was one of 2 terrorist groups that claimed responsibility for a car bombing in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. The explosion outside the Saudi National Guard training center killed 5 people. The State Department says this same group sent a communique in Arabic to an Arabic newspaper yesterday. The note said, quote, "All will be surprised by the size of the attack, the place, and the time. And the time will be tomorrow morning. Tomorrow is soon." The time of last night's TWA crash was early morning in the Mideast. Terrorist experts say the communique is credible.
I would take it very seriously. Whether or not the evidence points to a missile attack on a U.S. aircraft remains to be seen.
Senator Al D'Amato, live on our air today, confirmed the possibility of a surface-to-air missile. Investigators are looking at FAA radar tracking and studying an anomaly that might indicate a missile.
Could it have been a mid-air collision? Would it possibly involve even a ground-to-air missile? Those are the kinds of things that they're going to be looking at.
Experts say this Saudi-based terrorist group could have had access to military weapons, including missiles.
If these are people who fought in the Afghan war, then it's entirely possible that they were trained in the use of American Stinger missiles. Many Stingers were sent to Afghanistan, and we lost track of many of them.
4 members of the group, the Islamic Movement for Change, were recently beheaded for that car bombing last year. Experts suspect that the group wants to overthrow the current Saudi government and also get rid of the American presence now in Saudi Arabia. Again, there is much speculation, much to be learned as this investigation continues. Reporting live from the newsroom, I'm Diana Williams. Now back to you, Bill.
Okay, Diana, thank you very much. And when we come back in a moment, airport security. We've been on heightened alert in the metropolitan area for months. Now what? We'll have a live report from Kennedy Airport when our coverage of the crash of TWA Flight 800 continues. Next. 800 is causing a good deal of fear and apprehension among some air travelers today. Security was tight at TWA's terminal at Kennedy Airport today as airline employees made sure that no one was allowed inside without airline tickets. Air travelers' reaction to last night's tragedy was mixed.
I almost was not going to come. I didn't sleep last night, and I really hesitated about getting on the plane.
I'm a little concerned, but I'm not going to let it stop me from my plans.
Many of this morning's departing flights from Kennedy Airport were delayed or canceled, but normal travel, we are told, is resuming. For some of us, the fear of flying is diminished a little if we feel that airport security is working to protect us. Airport security in the New York area has been at a very high level for some time now. Bertha Coombs has that part of the story at Kennedy Airport. Bertha?
Bill, it's something we now take for granted. Think back to 1985 when that TWA flight was hijacked and we all were shocked into realizing that as Americans we were vulnerable to terrorism when we traveled. Now we take for granted that we won't see our loved ones into the airport when we travel. There's a lot of safety issues to be thought about. And when a plane goes down, we all automatically think about sabotage. Whatever caused Flight 800 to go down, security issues are being questioned tonight. There was no curbside check-in at the TWA International Terminal today, and passengers traveling overseas found themselves questioned by security right at the front door. Security and the tragedy of Flight 800 clearly on people's minds.
Whatever it was, it's an accident. So it's an accident. Doesn't mean that it will happen all the time.
You can't speculate as to whether there's a terrorist activities or mechanical. You figure at least today, I'm sure they're watching their P's and Q's, so to speak.
New York area airports have already been on heightened alert for the Olympics, but critics say more could and should be done. There are only 3 bomb detection devices in the United States, none in New York. A former security specialist for Israel's El Al Airlines says routine questioning of passengers needs to be tougher.
We are looking for the one in maybe millions passengers. The point is how to know and to determine who is the passenger who is suspicious, and him to take on the side and to investigate and to search everything he carries.
Former New York Police Commissioner William Bratton says traveling overseas through JFK this weekend, he felt security was strong.
The issue of security is twofold: costs. The devices are very costly, and convenience. Would the American public be willing to go through inconvenience more than we experience now?
And cost is a big issue with those bomb detection devices. They are more than $1 million a piece. Again, there are only 3 of them in the country, and right now 2 of them are in use in Atlanta, where people are arriving for the Olympics, which begin tomorrow. We're live at John F. Kennedy Airport. I'm Bertha Coombs, Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
Bill Evans has the AccuWeather forecast tonight, and it could mean trouble.
From ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening. There were no survivors, and instinctively we knew very quickly last night that all 228 people on board had died, especially after we heard the eyewitnesses describe an explosion and the fiery descent of TWA Flight 800 into the Atlantic off the coast of New York. And yes, President Clinton and the National Transportation Safety Board insist that this be treated as an accident until proved otherwise. But by this afternoon, federal investigators say they are leaning toward the possibility that this flight was destroyed on purpose by someone. In every tragedy of this magnitude, there are unforgettable images. Last night on the surface of the sea, burning jet fuel and wreckage, while somewhere out there in the dark, the Coast Guard and dozens of volunteers searched desperately for survivors. And throughout today, the urgent trolling for bits and pieces of people's lives. More than 100 bodies have been recovered by late afternoon. And for pieces of the 747 itself, from which in time the authorities will almost surely discover what happened, though it will take time. One thing that we all know after all these years, if this is terrorism, again, they have struck where they were least suspected. Tonight in Washington, everyone involved with the nation's security at the highest levels is focused on this, and they are looking very closely at a blip on a radar screen and a couple of faxes. We are joined tonight by our national security correspondent, John McWethy. John, how much progress have they made, if any?
Peter, authorities are considering the possibility of a bomb, and after reviewing tapes of the radar tracks of this plane just before and after it went down, they are considering another option. An unexplained blip on the radar screen has investigators considering the possibility that a small anti-aircraft missile may have been used, the same type employed by guerrilla fighters all over the world. Eyewitnesses described a bright object moving up toward the plane before the explosion.
I saw what appeared to be the sort of course and trajectory that you see when a shooting star enters the atmosphere. Almost immediately thereafter, I saw, in rapid succession, a small explosion and then a large explosion.
Whether it was a missile or a bomb, investigators say they are still not certain. But another piece of evidence seems to point towards terrorists from the Middle East. ABC News has learned that a written warning was sent by a group calling itself the Movement for Islamic Change, the same group that claimed credit for the terrorist bombing in Saudi Arabia that killed 5 Americans in November. The written warning was received by a major Arabic newspaper yesterday, but was apparently not passed along to authorities. In Arabic, it warned there would be a strike at an American target, and then in chilling specifics it said, quote, all will be surprised by the size of the response, the place, and the time. It continued, quote, the time will be tomorrow morning, and tomorrow morning is soon. When the plane exploded last night, because of the time differences, it was already tomorrow morning in the Middle East. The State Department and the White House this evening are downplaying that report, saying to them it seems more related to Saudi Arabia than to anything that happened off the coast of Long Island last night. Peter?
Okay, Jack McCarthy in Washington, thank you very much. We'll come back to the investigation in just a moment, but remember this, or to remind you, Flight 800 had taken off from New York's JFK Airport, headed for Paris. It traveled only about 40 miles. It was still climbing parallel to New York's Long Island when witnesses said they saw a fireball and then this plunge into the ocean about 10 miles from the shore south of the Mauritius Inlet. The search today covers 240 square miles of ocean. Here's ABC's John Donvan.
The task was grim and straightforward. Troll the waves. Recover the fragments. Anything could be evidence. Parts of the plane, some still burning. The property of passengers. The incidentals of what was meant to be a long, safe flight over the ocean. There were pieces of aircraft as large as 30 feet long. Many more that were much smaller. And of course, beginning last night, there were the bodies.
We saw our first piece of wreckage in about 15 minutes, and we had our first victim on board in about 27 minutes. The people that we did find were, there was a lot of broken bones and severe injuries, severe traumatic injuries. I really don't think that any of them suffered very much.
Coast Guard Captain Kevin Dunn commanded the first team of rescuers.
I think the crew just kept going. We just wanted to at least find one, just one. That's what the hope of finding just one is what really kept us going. We kept hoping that someone would call up on the radio and say, "There's a whole group of live ones over here."
But that did not happen. And the Coast Guard aircraft, designed to fly low and slow for search and rescue, found no one to rescue.
One break that searchers got today was the weather. There was a little bit of haze at this altitude, but there was almost no wind to create waves, so that the crash site remained contained within a relatively small area.
Meanwhile, bodies were carried by truck to the medical examiner's office 40 minutes inland. The site is under FBI guard, but until the crash is officially called a crime, the National Transportation Safety Board is in charge of all the evidence being brought back to shore.
Experts can look at pieces of metal or pieces of wreckage or pieces of cloth and find evidence of the difference between an explosion or not.
The water here is 120 feet deep. Divers are not scheduled to go in until tomorrow, assuming the weather holds. And Peter, there is now some question about the weather holding. We're told most recently that there's a line of thunderstorms approaching the area. We're not sure when and if they will hit, but in the meantime, the search continues. We are also told that the search will continue overnight. Peter?
John, you and I've covered lots of disasters sometimes together. What catches your attention more than anything in this one?
Well, this is vacation land here, Peter. This is some of the most beautiful beach in the country, and people are here in July on vacation, and yet just over the water there, the carnage, and it just leaves a sick feeling in the minds and hearts of a lot of people here who came out here to enjoy themselves.
Okay, thanks, John Donvan, very much. Many people went from those shores, volunteered to go out in the sea and help last night and today, too. The first people to see something horrible had happened in the skies were the fishermen and the pleasure boaters to whom John referred. And they were the first trying to help. ABC's James Walker is also in the Mauritius tonight.
Jason Fontana was at work a block from the ocean when he suddenly noticed what looked like a fiery comet.
A fireball, it's like a pulsating fireball coming across the sky. It just dipped behind the houses. And when it dipped behind the houses, like a couple seconds later, it was a huge explosion.
Annunziata Aiello Saeed said she was gazing at the sky when the plane exploded. Her description is so precise, the FBI questioned her for 2 hours.
And I could not be more emphatic about this. The explosion happened first, the sound happened first, and then the fireball followed.
Roland and Randy Penny also heard the blast, and while they weren't sure what had happened, they knew they wanted to help. So they boarded a friend's fishing boat, and using the black smoke as a compass heading, they set out on the 9-mile trip to the crash site.
Then you stumbled into the wreckage, and you seen sneakers, suitcases, seats, all kinds of stuffing from the seats. And we seen a lot of that for 2 or 3 hours before we stumbled onto a body.
And there were two, what was a young girl, and I was thinking her 20s, and still strapped in the seat of the plane.
The Pennies also spotted life vests they hoped were signs of survival.
You see 1 or 2 here and there on the surface. They have a little beacon on the blinks, and you'd see them every so often. You go up to them to check them and see if there was anything under them, but there was nothing.
By 4 o'clock this morning, after 6 hours of searching, the Pennies realized there was no hope of finding anyone alive, so they headed home.
It was quite horrifying, you know. I feel for the families, you know. When I ask why this happened, and that's the question, you know. If it's a terrorist act or something like that, that's upsetting. If it's an accident, we can deal with accidents, but if it's something that someone else is doing to us, it hurts.
We are haunted, said one resident of this summer community, and we're anxious to learn what happened here. James Walker, ABC News, Mauritius, New York.
TWA has just called us here in New York to revise the number of people who died on Flight 800. 230 people now, not 228. 230 people died. Tragedy and sadness for many more families. And when we come back, they waited for what seemed an eternity to hear the worst. We'll also talk about the school children and their chaperones who were so eager to get to friends. And we'll focus on the security system at Athens in Greece and John F. Kennedy here in New York. Of the flight's last few minutes.
We show the flight off the gate at 8:02 p.m., show the flight off the runway at 8:19.
As you're climbing out of 3,000 or 4,000 feet, you would be accelerating at the same time and climbing, but you keep your speed down below 250 knots until you clear 10,000 feet. Now, at this point in time, depending on how quickly you're getting out of the area, you would be coming into the Boston control area, leaving New York. Once you've cleared 10,000 feet, you can accelerate and go faster. You're not constantly talking to the people on the ground. You're not talking to the center at all times.
Flight 800 reached 13,700 feet. At 8:31 p.m., 12 minutes after takeoff, 800 disappeared from the radar screen.
It is our understanding from the various traffic control centers that there were no non-routine transmissions from the flight whatsoever, and no indication of any problem until the flight disappeared and went silent.
We, of course, can only try to understand what agony this is for the families and close friends who were sure, or not quite sure, that they had a connection on board Flight 800. ABC's Michelle Norris has been at Kennedy Airport, and she reports that those who could rush to the airport for news. And a desperate night turned into a desperate day.
The emotional toll on families and friends was made worse by the waiting. More than 18 hours after the plane fell from the sky, TWA had not produced an accurate list of those on board. For many, impatience turned into outrage.
I think there are two tragedies here. The tragedy that, of course, occurred last night, but even a greater tragedy in that the way we, the families, have been treated by TWA.
Just getting through to TWA proved to be an ordeal for those who were miles away from the crash site. Marcia Evans tried all night to get an answer from airline employees.
He said wait till TWA calls you and informs you of the bad news.
Late this morning, Evans was told her brother had taken another flight. But by late afternoon, Monty Seekerman of Ohio had heard no word about his daughter and her husband. But he's ready for bad news.
Honestly, it doesn't matter, Tom.
if they find the body or not. Do you think of her soul?
Mayor Rudolph Giuliani, who thought he might have known someone on board, took his outrage to the public.
We're certainly getting the runaround, but it doesn't matter if we're getting the runaround. You got a lot of families here that are getting the runaround by TWA.
Today, the airline tried to defend its actions.
TWA has handled this with the highest level of management attention since the very beginning.
Grief counselors who came here today to work with families and loved ones said TWA's delays and disorganization made it even more difficult for them to cope with this tragedy. Michelle Norris, ABC News, New York.
This has been a huge loss for one very small town in particular. 16 teenage members of a high school French club and their 5 chaperones were on their way to France for an adventure. They were all from Montoursville, Pennsylvania. Population, about 5,000. ABC's Aaron Hayes is there today.
In the few moments of the plane crash, life changed irrevocably for Montoursville. 21 of its own gone.
When I first heard it, I just started crying. That was all I could do. But now I'm to the point I can't even cry anymore. It's not going to be the same around here without him.
Overnight, parents of the students killed on the flight gathered to board buses for the long and difficult trip to New York.
I can't imagine what the parents are going through because I'm in so much pain right now. I just can't understand why something like this would happen.
This is a small school, a small town. The nature of a tragedy like this is to snatch lives suddenly, leaving those who knew the victims, and nearly everyone here knew someone, struggling to make sense of this.
When the TVs are on and you watch it and they say a French club from a small town in Pennsylvania, you still can't believe it's here.
All day, townspeople, students walked in, up to the school, trying to find a way to help. And they have one question: why? Why so small a place had to pay so high a price? Its children. The football player who will never see this field again. The senior who loved her job at the local ice cream shop. Our Lady of Lourdes Parish lost 4 teenagers to the crash.
It's not a question of asking why. We don't know why, and asking that question is to ask the unanswerable.
There will be a vigil and memorial service held tonight, and there are services to come, 21 of them. Still many difficult days ahead here. Aaron Hayes, ABC News, Montoursville, Pennsylvania.
This tragedy is not confined to the United States. Of course, the plane was going to Paris. There were 40 French citizens on board. And just as American families gathered at Kennedy Airport in New York, French families gathered at Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris. There are so many individual stories of vacationers and students, honeymooners and business people. We had a connection. Jack O'Hara was on board for years, the executive producer of ABC Sports, with his wife and his 13-year-old daughter. In a moment, what they will do to try to find out what really happened. And by that we mean among federal officials that there was a bomb on board, or at least that this was on purpose. The immediate question must be, how could it be put on board and how could it get through airport security? Our chief investigative reporter Brian Ross tonight on an airport with a troubled history and a security device not yet in place.
One focus of the federal investigation is whether a bomb with a delayed fuse device could have been planted on the jet when it was on the ground in Athens, Greece.
Athens' record is unfortunately very, very poor. It has been for many years. Terrorists have operated out of Greece for many years.
Greek authorities say TWA jets are always under tight security in Athens. But this March, Secretary of Transportation Federico Pena publicly declared airport security in Athens as not effective, only to then reverse his position 2 months later, congratulating the Greek government for security improvements. Another focus is whether a bomb made of plastic explosive could have been sneaked past security at Kennedy Airport in New York. There are new security devices, like this one at Ben Gurion Airport in Israel, which can fairly well detect plastic explosives. But there are no such devices at Kennedy Airport, and in fact only 3 of the $1 million devices are in use in this country, in San Francisco and Atlanta.
Foolproof or not, if it's the best that we've got, and other countries are using them at least to some satisfaction, yes, I think it's something that should be examined and deployed, as certainly more than we've tried to date.
In fact, many authorities say American airport security is still too much designed to stop the kind of terrorist hijacking seen in the 70s and early 80s instead of the bombings and sabotage that have marked the terrorists of the 1990s. Peter?
Brian, just one question. If this is an explosive device, in this day and age, how sophisticated can it be, and how small or large can it be?
Very sophisticated, Peter. It can be as small as a woman's handbag, a transistor radio, and it can be rigged in a way to go off after 2 or 3 takeoffs by an airplane and go off, say, after the 4th or 5th time a plane goes into the air. A very sophisticated device that is tough to stop.
Okay, thanks very much. A reminder, I suppose, after everything we've thought about today, that after the crash of Pan Am 103 in Lockerbie, Scotland, took a very, very long time to put this all together. We'll be right back. Concerned that some sort of terrorism was at least being considered by someone and connected to the Olympics, which open tomorrow. ABC's Judy Muller, who was there, tells us that security at the Atlanta airport was already very tight. They spent almost $200 million on security at that airport alone. There was also very tough security at all the Olympic venues, and last night only graphically reminds people that everyone in Atlanta has to be on their guard. So what is the federal government doing at the moment to try to find out what has happened and who, if anybody, has done this? We're joined now briefly by an ABC News consultant in Washington, Vince Cannistraro. He's a former CIA counterterrorism official. So what is the U.S. government doing all over the world at the moment? What are they looking for?
I think they're looking for patterns and information that's already been reported to them, either from technical means or from human agents. And I think they will be tasking their agent network to go out and try and collect information on who might have had a motive and why.
Okay, but there are lots of people like that. What are they doing at the moment? Are listening devices operating overtime all over the world? Are intelligence agents scurrying around doing what?
Well, I think that they're working very closely with friendly intelligence services in the Middle East in particular, who have the resources on the ground to give some help. But they're also working with agents who may or may not be close to known terrorist groups that have in the past either carried out acts of violence against the United States or have been threatening to do so. There is quite an intensive effort going around to turn up any recognizable pattern among the data that they have on hand or will collect pretty soon.
Okay, Vince Cannistraro, thank you very much. One can only think at the moment, too, how difficult it has been to penetrate so many organizations around the world. We'll be back right after this. We don't know very much. We know that no one survived last night's fiery plunge into the Atlantic Ocean off New York's Long Island. We now know that 230 people died, that is everybody on board. Was this an accident or an act of terror? The president urged us to be cautious and wait for evidence, which is still inconclusive. Much of that evidence is still at 120 feet below the waters of the Atlantic Ocean. The cockpit flight recorder, the other black boxes, the data recorders have not yet been recovered. And there is certainly in the intelligence community of the United States government now a suspicion, at the very least, that this was done on purpose. Later this evening on Nightline, they will go farther into this. That is our report on World News Tonight. I'm Peter Jennings. Good night.
Trying to cope with catastrophe. And now.
Hi, this is Carlos from North Philly. Good day, Philadelphia.
And now, Philadelphia's only primetime news hour, honored by the Associated Press as the best newscast in Pennsylvania, the Fox 10 o'clock News.
The bells of the National Cathedral in Washington toll for the victims of TWA Flight 800. In cities as diverse as Paris, France, and Montoursville, Pennsylvania, family and friends share a common emptiness, the emptiness of knowing that a loved one is not coming home. 230 lives lost, and at this hour, no known reason why. Good evening, everyone. Rich Noonan has the night off. I'm Jacqueline Bolden.
And I'm Jill Chernikoff. Here's what's happening tonight. All 230 people on board are dead. There are no survivors of TWA Flight 800, the plane that exploded and in a ball of fire descended into the water off the coast of Long Island, New York last night. There is widespread suspicion tonight that terrorists are behind the downing of the 747. Federal investigators are leaning toward the possibility that the plane was deliberately destroyed. Today, the urgent and gruesome search for life turned up 120 bodies and small pieces of wreckage. A tiny Pennsylvania town is especially grief-stricken tonight. 21 residents, including 16 teenagers, all died in the nation's second worst air disaster.
Fox reporter Rita Cosby has been following the TWA story all day. She filed this report just minutes ago from Long Island.
Although we have darkness, the search continues at this hour for more bodies and pieces of the plane. Investigators aren't officially calling this a crime scene, but they are certainly treating it like one. There are mounting reports that it may indeed have been a terrorist act, but U.S. officials are trying to downplay that information. Night falls on this peaceful coast as speculation increases that this destruction may be the result of a terrorist bomb. The FBI is assisting transportation safety investigators should it be determined what many fear, that a bomb may have caused this fiery explosion. A Saudi newspaper reportedly received warnings from a group called Movement for Islamic Change, saying Wednesday the United States would get a terrible surprise. There are also reports that a surface-to-air missile may have hit the plane, since a blip on the radar screen was reportedly seen just prior to the crash. But U.S. officials are not confirming any of these reports and stress that it is still way too early to tell what caused this terrible tragedy. Reporting from East Moriches, New York, Rita Cosby, Fox News. Now back to you.
Thanks. Residents of one tiny town in Pennsylvania are struggling tonight to make sense of the TWA plane crash. 21 residents of the small community of Montoursville died in last night's tragedy. 16 high school French club students and 5 chaperones had been on their way to France for a 10-day exchange program. Tonight, shocked and deeply saddened students and residents banded together at the high school for a prayer vigil.
We're here as a community to share one another's pain, to share the pain of tragedy, as well as the tragedy of pain.
Governor Ridge was to have attended the group meditation in honor of those whose lives were cut short. Earlier today, our Steve Keeley was in the closely knit community as word of the explosion spread.
Yeah, she was one of my best friends that was on there.
It's just such a tragedy.
The tragedy seemed to hit hardest here at Montoursville High School, where there were tears, there were hugs, and there was a message on the side of the school from the Key Club telling everyone to have a safe summer.
It's hard, especially for a small community, to lose a large number like this. It's hard to lose one, let alone, 21 at a time. I mean, you just can't do that.
One of the 21, French club member Erica Russell's best friend.
How excited was she to go to France?
She couldn't wait. She was so excited. She's always wanted to go to France, and she was so happy to go.
Erica Russell wanted to go to France herself, but learned just before the trip she couldn't go.
I wanted to go, but my mom wouldn't let me. She didn't have the money.
Besides losing her best friend, Erica says she lost her best teacher, the French teacher, Deborah Dickey.
She was great. She was awesome. She was funny. She made class really fun.
Students tried to console each other at the school, closed for the summer, but now open for counseling, and most could only scratch their heads in disbelief.
People just walking around looking at each other like, bewildered.
Students remembered their friends they saw as late as yesterday, realizing they'd never see them again.
They were nice, caring. They all respected everybody.
And so it was a difficult day as everyone here tried to hold on to some faint hope and hold on to each other for support as this small town tries to cope with a huge loss. In Montoursville, Pennsylvania, Steve Keeley, the Fox 10 o'clock News.
There was Philadelphia teacher Arthur Benjamin and his wife Joan. They were on TWA Flight 800. They were on their way to Paris to meet up with their 3 children to vacation in the south of France.
Students at Masterman School. His colleagues describe him as a math whiz
who taught himself about computers and who excelled at teaching kids.
I don't know if it's what I remember best, but what's so special about Arthur is the way that he could really meet the needs of kids.
Barbara Bravo, the principal at Masterman, said Benjamin was adept at encouraging students. Vivian Lowenstern is the teacher who worked side by side with Benjamin for the past year, creating a new program for gifted high school students.
I'll remember all the laughing and the fun times that we had while we were working, because he would always make things funny. He's a very humorous person. There's a lot that I'll remember.
I try to seal it off, but once I start talking about him, I can't seal it off anymore.
And science teacher Bill Mealy has known Benjamin for more than 20 years.
One of my best friends was gone. I felt terrible. I still feel terrible.
Today, the people who worked with Arthur Benjamin, learned from Arthur Benjamin, and shared their lives with him, tried to find comfort in their memories of him as they struggled with their grief.
You cannot fool kids. You can't pretend that you're interested in their well-being. And he didn't. He was. And I think everybody's going to miss him.
Among the other victims of TWA Flight 800 with ties to Pennsylvania are Judith Connolly Deloyer, whose family owns Connolly Containers. She lived in France with her husband. Gideon Miller was a captain for TWA who was on the flight as a passenger. The 57-year-old Miller was from Lancaster County. Amy and Kyle Miller, both 29 years old, gave each other the trip to Paris as a gift for their 5th wedding anniversary. They were from Tamaqua in northeastern Pennsylvania. TWA is just releasing the official list now, and we have late word that another Philadelphia person is on the list. Dan Callis was a TWA crew member. Jill.
Okay, Jacqueline. The tragic explosion of Flight 800 evoked eerie echoes and painful memories for families of victims of the 1988 Lockerbie disaster. That killed 270 people when a bomb exploded on Pan Am Flight 103. The Boeing 747 crashed on the town of Lockerbie, Scotland, killing 259 people on board and 11 people on the ground. It's an event that will likely burn in the memories of the victims' families forever. Eileen Minetti of Cherry Hill lost her son Rick, a 20-year-old junior at Syracuse University, and Stanley Maslowski of Haddonfield lost his daughter Diane, a 30-year-old bond trader in the Pan Am crash. Mrs. Minetti and Mr. Maslowski are kind enough to join us tonight from Cherry Hill at a time that I'm sure brings up painful memories and flashbacks. Thanks for being with us. Mrs. Minetti, I know that you've been watching how TWA officials deal with the victims' families because you have said many times that you were completely ignored by Pan Am after your son was killed. You're still angry about that, aren't you?
Well, the anger has subsided. I mean, there's so many more other events that have eclipsed it. But yes, when you hear about how TWA officials have treated the people from the Flight 800, it does bring it all back again.
And Mr. Maslowski, regardless of who or what is responsible, the effect after such a tragedy, I would imagine, is the same, a desperate form of shock. What do you recommend for these families? Should they get in touch with each other?
I think the family's salvation will be to band together as we as families from Pan Am 103 and find comfort with one another. This is what has kept us going because they are just beginning to live their hell.
Oh, no question. I guess after the initial confusion and the panic and a frantic need for more information, what can these families expect next?
Well, they can expect that they're going to have to deal with their grief, number one. Number two, they're going to have to deal with you media folks. They're going to have to deal with insurance companies, lawyers, airlines, and if what they're saying is true, if this is possibly a form of terrorism, then they're going to have to deal with the entire federal bureaucracy.
All righty, I thank you so much, Mrs. Minetti and Mr. Maslowski, for joining us tonight in this time that I'm sure is very difficult for both of you. Thank you again.
Welcome.
You're welcome.
Our Jesse Gary has been at the crash site since late last night, where the agonizing recovery effort continues. Jesse joins us live now from Long Island with the latest. Jesse.
Jacqueline, we've heard a lot of talk about the recovery effort over the past 24 hours, but until now we haven't been able to see what's going on out in the Atlantic up close. Tonight, photojournalist Dave Wertheimer and I take you on a journey that, for many recovery workers, is very emotionally trying.
Night to night, every time you think you saw it all, you see something else just like this. You know?
Pretty awesome.
The awesome sight is also overwhelming for many of the men and women working the recovery. By day's first light, Coast Guard crews with a complement of New York City divers delve into the unknown and the known.
We're looking for any kind of debris, so any kind of personal belongings.
They board a boat with no name,
44341,
just a number, and speed to an area filled with sorrow and silent voices.
It's still hard to believe, you know, you look at it and it doesn't look real, you know, so it's even hard to get that concept that you actually got dead bodies there, but you do.
There will be no pictures of dead bodies, just burnt debris from TWA Flight 800.
Mac almost looks like something orange on it.
The 240 square mile area off Long Island's southern coast is crammed with remnants of the ill-fated flight. Debris is in the waves and the wake and in the way.
Hey, Ken, you want to get this too?
They are pieces of a plane and pieces of a puzzle, a crime scene FBI agents will recreate to learn the cause. Floating on the water, a noxious mixture.
Might be some type of hydraulic fluid mixed with the fuel.
Floating in the water,
Starboard side!
haunting reminders of the lives cut short, the questions we ask, the answers we may never have.
Above their head. I mean, it was as if they were just, you know, G.I. Joes or something. You could bend them every which way.
This deadly incident, whether accidental or intentional, is marking a new way for many here to feel pain.
I'll tell you, visiting the families is one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. And I hope I never have to do it again.
Storms are forecast for this area tomorrow, which could hamper rescue and recovery efforts. And of course, the unanswered question, accidental or intentional? We're live in Suffolk County, Long Island. Jesse Gary, the Fox 10 o'clock news. Back to you in Philadelphia.
Okay, Jesse, thanks for the report. Among the teams of rescuers that responded to last night's crash of Flight 800 was a group of New Jersey State Marine Police. They powered their way through dark waters last night, pulling wreckage and more than a dozen bodies from the cold waters off Long Island. Late today, they arrived back on shore, and Dave Schratweiser was there.
After 16 hours at sea, they made their way up the Point Pleasant Canal, headed for home after a grueling night of pulling bodies from the Atlantic Ocean off Long Island. This 6-man New Jersey State Marine Police crew had seen death and destruction up close. They were part of a massive search and recovery team that scoured the ocean waters for the victims of TWA Flight 800.
How we doing, guys? A little tired, right? A little bit. Good job.
Sergeant Joe Heitz and his colleagues looked weary and somber as they arrived at their Point Pleasant dock. Almost too shaken to speak, the man who led this search team offered this comment on the horrible scene 10 miles off the beaches of Long Island.
It was an unpleasant thing we had to do. We were called upon for help. We responded. Excuse me, you're going to have to pardon my voice. We responded, we did our best, and we're home.
The call for help came to the Point Pleasant station here about an hour after the airliner went down. A Marine Police crew scrambled to its boat and made the 3-hour trip through the darkness to the crash scene off Long Island. The crew said they worked side by side with the Coast Guard in the pitch black of night. They recovered parts of the downed aircraft and 20 bodies, many of them charred beyond recognition. The sorrow was evident on their faces. Height said they came upon their first victim only moments after they arrived on the scene.
The crew was, I can't say enough about the crew that was on the boat. Everybody pulled together. We knew what we were on the way to. We knew what we had to do, and we just went out and we did it.
The Marine Police crew won immediate praise from their boss, the superintendent of the state police. He personally thanked them for their efforts.
I admire the work that they did, and I'm, as I said, I'm extremely proud of all the the effort that they put in.
The emotional and exhausting 24 hours on duty took its toll on the crew. After some much-needed time off, they say they will be back on duty, back on the water, hoping against hope that they won't ever have to face a mission like this one again. In Point Pleasant, Dave Schratweiser, the Fox 10 o'clock news.
Our coverage of the crash of TWA Flight 800 will continue when we return. Jan Fisher joins us live from Philadelphia International Airport with the latest on security concerns.
We'll also talk live to a local congressman who chairs the House Task Force on Terrorism. And later, Dr. Brian McDonough speaks with an expert in the field of grief and loss. The Fox 10 o'clock news continues. A crash continues now. The plane that went down was a Boeing 747-100 delivered in 1971. This particular model can seat more than 400 people on 2 decks. The plane can carry 47,000 gallons of jet fuel in its tanks. You can see that here in yellow. The combined accident rate for all of the 747 models built is 1.6 fatal accidents per 1 million departures, making it one of the safest airlines ever built. Of course, airline passengers all across the country are somewhat wary tonight, especially since there are more questions than answers about the explosion on board. Jan Fisher is live now at Philadelphia International Airport with more on security concerns there.
Jill, at any airport at any time, there's always a concern for safety and security. There are 5 levels of preparedness. Philadelphia International is at level 3, where it has been for the past 6 months.
Where are we at here? In the shaded area?
That means passengers have to show ID at check-in. Employees are more vigilant about unattended bags. The TWA disaster has had an impact, but here it is more of a check and double check. No one taking anything or anyone for granted.
Heightened police patrols. We're also doing some additional photo identification checks of airport employees.
Brochures are now available to help passengers be more aware of what they can do to help protect themselves. It is a wait-and-see situation. The airport is in constant touch with the Federal Aviation Administration.
FAA has told us at this time that there's no determination to raise the security levels.
Other restrictions would include restrictions on curbside parking, curbside check-in, and a whole host of other things the cops would probably just as soon we not tell you about. You know, it almost seems as though the government is trying to play down the bomb theory, perhaps in order not to start wholesale panic. Yet, as Kathy Matusiak tells us tonight, there is hardly anyone who hasn't taken an extra pause before boarding.
For this longtime TWA ticket agent, waiting for word was the worst. In her 22 years with the airline, Liz Enai has never had to deal with a crash, nor have many other anxious TWA employees.
We have a lot of friends that are flight attendants and pilots, and nobody knows, where anyone is right now. I have home telephone numbers, but I was scared to call home.
It's certainly a tragedy, and, for the company and the families and the crew members. That's really all I have to say.
Pilots and crew went on with their jobs. None of TWA's 8 domestic flights out of Philadelphia today were canceled.
2 bags you're checking?
Yes.
So you pack everything in those bags yourself?
If passengers were talking among themselves about the fatal crash, they weren't talking to airline personnel about it. But the uneasy feeling hung in the air.
It's scary.
I hope it was an accident, but unfortunately I'm quite skeptical about that.
If passengers were a little bit on edge today, some became even more apprehensive and agitated when a Northwest Airlines flight was delayed several hours because of mechanical problems. Passengers say they were left waiting and wondering.
If everybody will please wait in line, I have to help one person at a time.
The captain kept saying, I wish I could tell you more, but we really don't know. We can't fly without these parts. For some reason, the fatal crash of TWA Flight 800 is bothering even the best of frequent flyers, who've never been rattled by crashes before.
I don't know if it's because of the media coverage on Southwest airline or it's been coupled with a few crashes, but this one has made me think.
At Philadelphia International Airport, Kathy Matusiak, the Fox 10 o'clock news.
Passengers may be somewhat concerned, but there have been no problems here. For the most part, things have gone rather smoothly. Live at Philadelphia International, I'm Jan Fisher. Back to you.
All right, thanks, Jan. For a long time, terrorist attacks were something Americans only saw on television, happening in other parts of the world, places like the Middle East or Great Britain. Now we are painfully aware that terrorism can strike Americans. First, there was the bombing of the World Trade Centers in February of 1993. Then last year's deadly bombing in Oklahoma City, which killed 168 people. Just weeks ago, the attack on American servicemen and women in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, and now the possibility that TWA Flight 800 was also attacked by terrorists. Joining us now to talk about the possibility of terrorism is New Jersey Republican Congressman Jim Saxton, who chairs the House Task Force on Terrorism. Good evening, Congressman.
Good evening.
What do you know that you can tell us that points to terrorism as the cause of the crash of Flight 800?
Well, first, I think it's important to point out that we don't know that it was terrorism. There are certain indicators that would perhaps point that way. First of all, you just had a series of shots on what led up to this interview showing a variety of terrorist attacks against Americans, and of course there was another one last November that you didn't put in that series. So as we see, the international terrorist community certainly does not hesitate to move against Americans. Secondly, in the specific case of this airplane, there was apparently a warning in an Arab newspaper in the last couple of days and indicated this precise period of time. Secondly, there was an indication that there could have been a surface-to-air missile seen not only by an eyewitness, but a blip on the radar screen as well. And so there are some, there is growing evidence pointing toward terrorism in this case.
Have you seen those radar tapes that they're talking about that show that blip that could have been a surface-to-air missile?
I have not seen them yet. We have heard the reports on them. They have been described to me, but I have not seen them.
And you did refer to that letter from the Middle East group, the Movement for Islamic Change. Has there been any conversation? That letter was sent to a major Arab newspaper that an attack was imminent, but the newspaper never notified American officials. Has there been any conversation with Americans about that?
There has been conversation within the intelligence community. The levels of precaution have been up, and so we always take those kinds of things seriously, those warnings seriously, and of course this one was taken equally seriously.
Congressman, I don't know your schedule. Let me ask you one other quick question. You are chairman, as I said, of the subcommittee. When do you anticipate, and I know it's early, you said that there may be only indications, there will be investigations. When do you see any possible congressional action?
Well, the congressional action may come over a period of time. First of all, it's important to note that there are some precautions that can be taken to avert bombings. That means higher security at airports. That means more regulations being put into place relative to the use of airlines and how we board them, how we permit people to board them. But secondly, there's another level of activity that Congress is going to have to be involved in, and that is first the recognition that other countries are sponsoring, training, equipping, and financing these terrorists. Those countries, of course, are located in the Middle East and in Africa. They include Iran, they include Iraq, Syria, Pakistan, the Sudan, Saudi Arabia itself in some cases, not the government of Saudi Arabia, but individuals in Saudi Arabia, but the governments of all or some of the other countries that I mentioned.
Okay, and, Congressman, go ahead. You want to make one final point?
And when Congress decides that terrorism is an act of war against our people, there will be a response necessary in these cases.
Thank you for stopping by tonight, Congressman Jim Saxon of New Jersey. Coming up more on the TWA crash, Dr. Brian McDonough talks with a psychiatrist about the grief that the families and the friends are feeling.
And we'll look at how the crash is affecting security at the Olympics.
Several bodies that were laid out deceased on the back of one of the Coast Guard boats that were totally naked because of the explosion or the impact. Their clothes were literally blown off their bodies. We found a life vest, clearly a TWA life vest that said TWA on it, that was not inflated, which tends to make me believe that these people were not expecting any kind of tragedy or explosion, or they would have been prepared with their life vests on. We picked up some luggage of a local Long Island girl, and we picked up a letter written in French. From the cover of the letter, it looked like it was possibly a love letter with a man and a woman on the front of the picture. We actually commandeered a Coast Guard vehicle out there, told them we had some stuff, and they said they did not have room for the stuff. They had too many bodies on board. In the afternoon, when I went out with the Coast Guard people were dredging the water with poles, picking up debris to take back so the NTSB could piece together what happened. And one of the pieces that they picked up was a chair cushion which had some flesh belonging to an arm attached to the bottom of it. Well, this was absolutely one of the most gruesome things I've ever seen. I've covered the Avianca plane crash, and about 15 years ago, a plane crash at JFK that killed several hundred people. But if it's true that this was a bomb that blew this up, those two were not terrorist attacks. That makes this even more gruesome. I won't forget the smell of the jet fuel burning. It made us so nauseous that we had to return earlier than we wanted to shore. We wanted to stay out longer, but we just couldn't. Everybody was getting dizzy and lightheaded. Well, I've never condoned terrorism, obviously, but whoever did this, they just don't know words for what loss they've created for those who are gone and for those who have to go on. mourning those who are gone.
As you can see, Alan was as shaken by his ground zero experience as the many others who were involved in the recovery operation. Just because you're just taking pictures of a horrifying scene like that doesn't mean you don't share the human grief, just like anyone else. Nice job, Alan. John and Rosie, back to you.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Alan. And officials are warning people tonight that if they spot what looks like wreckage from the plane, don't touch it. Call 911. It could be hazardous.
And we'll be back with more of our coverage in just a few minutes.
And pray for a miracle and do everything at the site to see if there could be survivors found. That it now appears clear that that will not be the case.
TWA will not release a complete passenger list until later tonight, but we have compiled a partial list based on information we have from families of the victims. Some of them come from our area.
You know, when you hear Hamptons, you usually think about the beaches and models and movie stars. But last year, the Hamptons meant fire in the forests, and now fire in the sky and death. Uniquan reports.
It is a playground for the rich and famous, a vacation mecca synonymous with sun, style, and the stars. Hit 2 summers in a row by tragedy. Last year, devastating fires destroyed thousands of acres of luscious land in the Hamptons. Now the death of innocent passengers in a mysterious explosion and fire has drawn the international spotlight, but not in the flattering way the folks here have been used to. There is a somberness of mood here along Main Street that you might not have seen 2 summers ago.
Our home fortunately wasn't touched last year. We're in Remsenburg, and this summer, you know, fortunately, this is just something that we're kind of bystanders to. But just puts it in perspective how lucky you are when you're not touched by tragedy. And that you look around and you have good health, and you know, and you say your prayers at night.
But others say the mood here is just fine. That business in a town dependent on summer trade is more than holding its own.
This year for me is better business. It's my 2nd year, and sales are up. Individual sales are up, and sales in total are up. So I think we're doing pretty well here, actually.
The old-timers here say, don't worry. The spirit of the Hampton took years to build, and it will persevere in spite of tragedy. On Main Street in West Hampton Beach, Long Island, I'm Uniquan, Fox News.
And the police tell us that the beaches in the Hamptons are open, but they're advising you to stay out of the water because of all the debris from the crash. All right, still ahead, Mario Bosquez has a special report on the road to Atlanta. You can bet it's no...
We've heard about the 2 C-130 aircraft that were in the area on training missions, and they were firing flares. Would a flare be something that might be powerful enough to cause an explosion? And how flammable is the fuel mixture on board the aircraft?
Well, it's unlikely the flare would cause that kind of damage. It could, if it went into an engine, it could probably put an engine out, but a lot of other things, just a bird can do that. So that in itself doesn't seem to be too feasible of a possibility either. Even the missile, if we talk about a shoulder-fired missile going up there, we're talking about a couple of pounds of explosive. Basically, that's what these missiles carry, is about 2 pounds of explosives. That in itself is not entirely likely to bring down an airplane the size of a 747 and weighing 750,000 pounds and 200 feet long. If it hits in the right place, it's going to go into an engine. If it does the right kind of damage, it could cause the entire airplane to blow up. But there have been instances where airplanes like this have been hit by these missiles, and it's put an engine out, but but hasn't done any other serious damage. So that's it's still. I think the external theory is a highly unlikely one.
All right, Bob Rupileski, who is the North American editor for Interavia magazine, we appreciate your joining us and giving your perspective on this. We'll continue with more of our coverage of the aftermath of Flight 800 when we come back.
The possibility of terrorist involvement in last night's TWA crash is casting a shadow over Olympic preparations in Atlanta. But officials say they've spent years planning for every worst-case possibility, and their security measures are adequate. At Atlanta's Hartsfield International Airport, concrete planters protect the terminal building from cars and trucks. And state-of-the-art scanning equipment can identify hard-to-detect plastic explosives. Despite the TWA disaster, Atlanta police say they're not making any last-minute changes in security plans.
Security is a concern for us during the Olympics in general. Certainly, this is early on with this situation, and there's nothing to suggest that there is any kind of correlation between the crash and the Olympic Games at this point.
The Olympics opening ceremonies take place tomorrow night. Atlanta is expecting 2 million visitors over the next few weeks.
Atlanta isn't the only city where airport security is being scrutinized. The TWA disaster has airport managers across the United States reassessing safeguards. CNN's John Holloman has the story.
We'll need your ID, please.
When you check in at an airport these days, you'll be asked to show a picture ID card and whether you were asked to carry something onto your flight. Those are some of the new airport security rules put in place by the FAA a year ago. But should the crash of TWA Flight 800 prove to be no accident, those tougher measures may not be considered tough enough.
If this event turns out to have been a terrorist event, then obviously we've got a problem. And one of the first things that we will have to do is figure out whether the problem was with the overall security system that's in place or whether somebody failed to implement existing security regulations.
The Department of Transportation keeps a list of international airports considered unsafe. Until May, Athens, Greece, the TWA plane's last stop before New York, was on that list. But security for international flights like TWA 800 already is tougher than it is within the U.S. For example, on international flights, passengers and their luggage are matched so that if you don't board the flight, your luggage will be removed from the cargo hold. There are more sophisticated devices available to screen luggage and people for explosives. But
the cost of implementing several of these measures will be in the billions of dollars. There's one estimate that it will cost roughly $1 billion to even get started to upgrade some of our current technology.
And would Americans put up with more security?
I am so much for them checking it that I'd be willing to travel without my luggage to get to my destination, just so that I knew that everyone was safe.
In my opinion, terrorism can't stand, and so whatever it takes, you've got to put up with it.
It may mean you have to suffer a little more inconvenience at the airport. It may mean that you have to subject your baggage not just to electronic search, but physical search, maybe your person, to increase scrutiny. I think the American public will put up with that.
Federal officials say there are 4 levels of airport security that can be imposed. U.S. airports are at level 3 today, but a decision to go to level 4, the highest level, could come if officials decide terrorists were responsible for the downing of TWA Flight 800. John Holloman, CNN, Washington.
CNN's comprehensive and continuing coverage of the crash of TWA Flight 800 will continue when we come back.
The flight's explosion over the Atlantic created a mixed blessing for search crews. The water extinguished some of the flames and left more debris intact. But those same waves also swallowed much of the wreckage or cast it to the tides. CNN's Jeff Flock looks beneath the surface, literally, of a seagoing search now. He joins us now live. Jeff, I understand divers will be going below the surface tomorrow. I wonder if you could give us a preview of what that will be like for them.
Yeah, we'll try to do so. New York Governor George Pataki, as well as Bob Francis of the National Transportation Safety Board, indicating both tonight that they thought divers might go down as early as tomorrow. To try and give you a feel for that, we went out today to within 2-3 miles or so of the impact point and dove beneath the surface to take a look at what it looks like down there. These are pictures we just brought back. Perhaps you can see the silt. Very, very difficult to see down there. What you are seeing is pieces of wreckage, but I caution you, this is not wreckage of Flight 800. This is the wreckage of the USS San Diego, which lies not too awfully far from the impact site. That was an armored cruiser that was sunk during World War I in 1918. And although the pieces of that ship have been down there for quite some time, very, very similar conditions will be facing the divers. And it's expected to be Navy divers that will go down with a NOAA vessel that'll do sonar and try to target the pieces of wreckage. They'll then probably mark that with buoys and then send divers down to actually do what these men you see here are doing, which is shine lights and try to find pieces of the wreckage. Obviously, very, very important pieces of wreckage are yet to be found, specifically the black box voice and data recorders, as well as other perhaps significant pieces of the wreckage as they try to put the pieces of this investigation together. So very important work will be done beneath the surface. We are told that water temperature in terms of conditions will be about 40, 41 degrees, which of course is cold. It's about 110, 120 feet of water that they'll be diving in, so that's a reasonably deep dive for those who know anything about diving. So it'll not be an easy task. Very, very different from the Value Jet crash, for example, where of course it was very shallow but very muddy. This a little bit easier to see, but very, very deep and very cold. That's what it'll be like out there. We'll have a full report on that a little bit later, Kathleen.
Jeff, is the search for the recorders considered now a priority?
It's the absolute #1 priority, as Robert Francis, the vice chairman of the NTSB, indicated tonight in his press briefing. Very, very important. They want to hear what went on just before and, of course, what the orientation of the aircraft was before it crashed, trying to determine just what happened before impact.
All right, Jeff Flock, thanks so much for that report. Well, that does it for our comprehensive coverage of the downing of Flight 800. We will continue our coverage at midnight Eastern, a 90-minute show then. I'm Kathleen Kennedy.
I'm Lyndon Souls. Thank you for joining us.
Action News, Delaware Valley's leading news program, with Gary Papa, Dave Roberts, and Jim Gardner.
Thursday night, Jim's off. I'm Mark Howard. The big story on Action News, the investigation into the crash of TWA Flight 800, now the second worst aviation disaster in U.S. history. Searchers have spent the day in the waters off Long Island, New York, pulling parts of the 747 out of the Atlantic Ocean. They've also recovered the bodies of 140 of 230 passengers and crew on the plane when it exploded and crashed last night. Among the victims, a Philadelphia teacher, a member of a prominent Philadelphia family, and 21 students and teachers from the central Pennsylvania town of Montoursville. Flight 800 was on its way from New York's JFK Airport to Paris last night when it blew up 12 minutes into the flight. ABC News says investigators are considering the possibility the plane was shot down by a small anti-aircraft missile. The report cites an unexplained blip on the radar and a witness who says he saw what looked like a bright comet heading toward the plane.
Almost immediately thereafter, I saw, in rapid succession, a small explosion and then a large explosion.
ABC says the group that claimed credit for a terrorist bombing in Saudi Arabia last year sent a letter to an Arabic newspaper yesterday warning of an attack at about the time the plane went down. But the White House says there's no concrete information to support that ABC report. And early today, President Clinton discouraged speculation.
We will determine what happened. But for now, I want to caution again the American people against jumping to any conclusions and ask that today, overwhelmingly, our people remember the families of the people who were on that flight in their prayers.
The worst ever American air crash, the 1979 crash of a DC-10 at Chicago's O'Hare Airport. It killed 273 people. The monumental task of trying to narrow down the cause of the TWA tragedy continues tonight on Long Island. Action News reporter John Rollins is live via satellite from East Moriches, New York, with the very latest. John?
Well, Mark, we've heard from both the NTSB tonight and Governor George Pataki of New York. What we're being told is that the surface search continues tonight using spotlights and special infrared detection equipment. Tomorrow, the #1 priority will be to put divers into the water to look for the black boxes. So despite those earlier reports, apparently erroneous reports, they still have not found the black boxes yet. Now, as you have said, there has been lots of broadcast speculation concerning a terrorist link in this case. There has been talk of a small missile somehow detected possibly on radar. Officials we talked with tonight sidestepped that issue for the most part, but if you listen carefully, they didn't deny the possibility either.
Well, that's why I think it's important not to speculate, because various theories are advanced that can be very disturbing, and at this point they're just that, they're theories. And until there is more hard evidence, I don't think it's in anyone's interest to have speculation about possible causes.
Can that be discounted, though? I mean, radar tapes can be checked very easily.
The FBI is doing a thorough investigation and will come to the appropriate determination.
We're always looking at multiple possible causes when we start, and we end up in a narrowing down process. Now, it happens that in some cases this involves the possibility of criminal activity. Sometimes it's a question of maybe it was a fire member, maybe it was an engine failure.
Overnight and this morning, it was hoped this would be a rescue effort. But as the day wore on, it was clear there would be no survivors. Searchers found a large number of parts of the downed plane, some up to 30 feet long. They also found little things, personal things, purses, pictures, books of poetry, a passport. Several of the bodies have been positively identified, but the local medical examiner said most of the identification process is likely to be slow because many of the victims are young and have few dental records.
At least initially, we've been running into a lot of relatively young people, meaning that they have excellent dentition, but by the same token, they don't have much in the way of dental fillings and so forth, which means that dental x-rays have to be extensive, and these take time.
Okay, we're back live right now. We've been given a range of numbers as far as the number of bodies that have been recovered, between 100 and 140. It was explained to us tonight the difficulty is that they are finding numerous body parts at this point at the crash scene. Summing up, I think when you go back to cause here, what we're being told tonight is nothing has been ruled out yet. I'm John Rollins, live on the Action Cam in Long Island. Mark?
Thank you, John. And now on to the very personal stories of loss. 230 lives snuffed out in an instant. Arthur Benjamin, a very popular teacher at Masterman High School in the Spring Garden section of Philadelphia. He and his wife, Joan, on Flight 800 en route to visit a daughter in Paris. Today, a colleague, Bill Mealy, told Karen Friedman Arthur Benjamin loved his students, and they loved him.
He was a father confessor, a counselor. He just did much more than just walk into a classroom on a daily basis and try to do the 3 R's.
Benjamin taught computer sciences in the gifted student program. He will be sorely missed. And a member of the prominent Connolly family of Philadelphia was killed on the flight. 46-year-old Judith Connolly de Louvrier was going to her summer home in Paris to be with her children. Ironically, she left a day early. Her husband, Philippe, left today on schedule. And tonight he's en route to France preparing his 2 children to come back to their mother's funeral. Mrs. de Louvrier was one of the 6 children in the family which owns Connolly Container of Manioc. Late tonight, we learned that 2 other local names are on the TWA listing of victims in the ill-fated Flight 800. The airlines identified one crew member as 22-year-old Dan J. Callis of Northeast Philadelphia, and the name of 48-year-old James Hull of Southampton, Bucks County, a TWA employee, is also on the list. There are still scores of other names with no addresses. The impact of the tragedy is growing. The crash of Flight 800 has devastated 230 families beyond belief. But in upstate Pennsylvania, it has devastated an entire community. 16 members of the high school French club from the tiny town of Montoursville, up near Williamstown, were on the plane along with 5 adult chaperones. The town of 5,000 held a prayer vigil tonight. Flora Postorero joins us live by satellite. Flora, it has been a long, sad day up there.
It sure has, Mark. There is a deep sense of sorrow and sadness in Montoursville tonight. This community is in mourning the loss of 21 loved ones who perished on TWA Flight 800. The 16 French Club students and the 5 adult chaperones were going to Paris on a learning trip. They never made it. Tonight, this community came together. They're trying to get through the pain and the hurt they're feeling. They're holding on to each other, looking for strength. These are the faces of TWA Flight 800, 18-year-old Dan Bushevsky, 15-year-old Claire Gallagher, and 15-year-old Julia Grimm. 3 of the 16 Montoursville High School French Club students killed in the explosion. There are flowers at the entrance to the school, and the headline on the local newspaper spoke volumes. Agony is what students and this small community are feeling.
Nothing good about it. There's nothing really much to say. I mean, everything's over with, but there's a lot of people that's feeling bad around here.
I lost a lot of my friends on that flight, and, you know, there is no word to describe how I feel right now.
Hundreds of students turned out for a prayer vigil at the school in memory of the victims.
My God, why have you forsaken me?
More than 2,000 people packed the school gymnasium. Dozens of floral arrangements were sent to the school as the entire community tries to make sense of this tragedy that claims 16 young lives and 5 adults. The classmates of the French students were reminded it's okay to cry, to express their sorrow and grief.
As deep as this pain is tonight, there is an eternal wealth of comfort from the heavens that delights in enveloping us.
Pennsylvania Governor Tom Ridge was at the prayer vigil. He talked to reporters after.
Reminded of a quote. It's not exactly correct this evening. It's not an exact quote attributed to Abraham Lincoln, who said that during times of personal challenge and adversity, sometime the only place he could go to find comfort was on bended knee.
Now, this community is absolutely devastated and is going to take a very long time for Montoursville to heal. Counselors have been at the school all day long talking to the youngsters, and the crisis center will be open once again tomorrow. There is also talk that some sort of a memorial service will be held at the school next week. I'm Flora Pastorero reporting live on the action cam from Montoursville. Mark?
Thank you, Flora. Before he went to Montoursville tonight, Governor Ridge paid official tribute to the crash victims. He ordered flags on all Pennsylvania state buildings flown at half-staff, the traditional sign of mourning for prominent citizens. The flags are usually kept at half-staff till the funerals are over. In this case, that will probably be sometime next week. In Washington, President Clinton spent some time this morning with members of the Boys and Girls Nation. There in Washington for the 50th anniversary of the organization, Mr. Clinton asked them to spend a minute in silent prayer for those youngsters from Montoursville. More official recognition of the tragic loss on Flight 800.
Amen.
Every plane crash raises travelers' fears, and even speculation about terrorism raises concerns about security. Let's go live to Denise James at Philadelphia International Airport now. Denise, what are you finding tonight?
Well, I'm finding tonight was particularly tense. There was a suspicious package located in Terminal A here at about 9:15 this evening. For about an hour and a half, folks didn't know what the package contained. The bomb squad was called out. The upper and lower level of Terminal A was shut down. No outgoing planes were affected, but incoming planes were diverted to some of the other terminals here at the airport. We still are not sure what was in the package. If the package was taken away by the bomb squad, we're still waiting to hear from folks here at the airport about that. Now, overall, there has been a generally heightened security here at the Philadelphia International Airport for 5 or 6 months now. They have been operating on what's called Level 3 security. Level 3 security means no curbside baggage check-in on international flights. Picture IDs are required for all flights.
And you're checking 2 bags today, is it?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, and you have packed your own bags, and you are aware of all the contents inside. No unknown person has asked you to place anything inside.
No, ma'am.
And they have not been left unattended at all since they have left the airport.
Unattended luggage and packages are reported to airport police for removal or disposal. Unattended cars are ticketed and towed if left too long. Inside the terminal, TV crews can't go beyond security checkpoints to the gate areas. This couple heading for Rome applauds tough security measures, even if it means delays.
They can't become too secure for us. Okay, I think it's great.
No delay. The delays don't bother you at all?
No, absolutely not. As long as they're safe, I'll wait as long as I have to.
As headlines shout reminders of last night's disaster, a woman traveling to Munich, Germany tonight cannot help worrying.
A little bit scared, yes. I have to think about, you know, the people that are in such sorrow now.
There is curbside baggage check-in for domestic travelers. A Wisconsin-bound group wonders if that's smart.
I think they should just continue carry on. I think everything should be checked, and everything should go through the X-ray. And that would eliminate a big problem. That would eliminate luggage left unattended.
Still, some travelers manage to ignore the nagging fears gripping many across the nation tonight.
I think when it's your time to go, you're going to go no matter what. So I'm not really afraid.
Well, the airport continues to maintain level 3 security. Level 4 would involve a little bit more strict access, access only to ticketed passengers beyond security, and no parking within 300 feet of the terminal building. That's if there were heightened security beyond what there actually is today. And that would only occur if the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, requested or required that of the airport. So for now, level 3 security will continue to be maintained. I'm Denise James, live on the action cam at the Philadelphia International Airport.
Denise, thank you very much. That's the latest on Flight 800 tonight. Nightline will have a special expanded edition later dealing with the crash of Flight TWA 800 and the latest on the investigation immediately following this broadcast. Still to come on Action News.